they're eager to reopen, but they want to do it in a safe manner. And we want them to do it in a safe manner. Let's provide some incentives for that. One example of how that process can be helped along is an expanded tax credit for new hiring called the Work Opportunity Tax Credit. It's already out there. It's legislation that passed years ago, and it helps, let's say, veterans, returning citizens who are looking for a second chance. It gives them the chance to get a job because the employer gets a tax credit for a while, and then almost always that person ends up getting a job. Let's include COVID-19 unemployed in that, people who've lost their job because of COVID-19. That makes all the sense in the world to get people back to work. There's also something that's in law now based on the CARES legislation called the Employee Retention Tax Credit. This, I think, is very important. Companies that couldn't access the PPP because they didn't qualify or didn't want to have access to this program kind of as an alternative. And it gives companies a tax credit against their payroll taxes, the employer-side payroll taxes, if they keep people on or bring people on. Again, this makes all the sense in the world right now to encourage more hiring to ensure we can get this economy moving again and do so safely. Speaking of safely, I've also introduced a new tax credit that was part of the HEALS legislation that was introduced a few weeks ago. It's called the Healthy Workplaces Tax Credit, which helps businesses pay for this protective equipment, like the plexiglass shields, like the PPE that they now need, which is expensive. Just the gowns and the masks and the gloves, those expenses add up, particularly for businesses that are having a tough time because of the weakening economy out there. These credits will help not just to reopen again, but to reopen safely. And I think getting these kinds of tax credits into the coronavirus legislation would be very smart. And again, these should be bipartisan efforts. Third, while I'm pleased we're revitalizing the successful PPP program, I think there are steps to improve it that we ought to take up in whatever our final package is. For example, one oversight in the original PPP legislation is that people who have been convicted of a felony going back 5 years are not able to accept the PPP loan. So one day I get a call from a guy back home, and Troy Parker's his name. Troy said, I can't get a PPP loan. I am a guy who had a financial issue, financial fraud issue. I had a felony conviction. I got out of incarceration, and I started my own business. I took my second chance. He said, I did everything that you are always talking about, Portman, which is we want to encourage people to take that second chance. We want to give them the opportunity to get the training to be able to do that. And then he went out and hired a bunch of other second chance folks, and he started a cleaning business. And it's quite successful. But obviously, with coronavirus, a lot of the offices he cleaned and others said, we can't have you come in. He lost his businesses. He was about to shut his doors. He couldn't get a PPP loan. Why? Because within the last 5 years, he'd had a felony conviction. Well, that's not what we should be doing here. We shouldn't be penalizing people who've turned their lives around and done, again, all the right things and hiring other second chance individuals. We should be helping them to stay on their feet and to continue to do what they're doing for themselves, the community, their workforce. So we worked with the Treasury Department, and to their credit, we got them to put forward a temporary solution, which was a change in the rule so that Troy could get his PPP loan and others like him around the country. We now need to make that permanent. So that's an example of something we should do, totally bipartisan. And I worked with colleagues on the other side of the aisle on this issue, and I'll continue to, because this is one where, again, Republicans, Democrats alike, as Americans, would want this to be part of the legislation. Fourth, while I'm glad this bill reflects the bipartisan support for educational funding, I had hoped it would also reflect that Republicans and Democrats alike have come out for additional support and flexibility for state and local governments. Now, Ohio's been particularly hard hit here because our cities in Ohio, unlike your city, wherever you are in America, probably, can use income taxes as a revenue source. I think 90% of cities can't do that, but in Ohio, we can, and we do. And obviously, income taxes went down with this coronavirus and the economy falling short. So they suddenly find themselves with less revenue coming in and then additional expenses, fire, police, EMS, coronavirus expenses for public health. So it's been tough for a lot of our cities in Ohio. And so I've been pushing for not just more funding on a targeted basis, showing need, but also more flexibility to be able to use the funding for closing that revenue gap which is caused by the weak economy, which is caused by the coronavirus. So it is related. And certainly we ought to be able to do that on a bipartisan basis. That's what a lot of Democrats have talked about that they would like to do. Well, I'm not the only Republican who wants to work with Democrats on that. We could get that into a final bill, and that would help all of our cities. Let's move forward on this. Finally, all of us agree, I think, that we need to have better access to telehealth. And telehealth medicine has been one of the few silver linings in this dark cloud. A lot more of my constituents are using telehealth. One way they're using it is for behavioral health, mental health services. Another is for addiction services. But also just generally, telehealth has been something that has been very helpful. A lot of people say that in the last few months, we've gone 5 years ahead of where we would have been in terms of telehealth. I think the same is true with regard to teleworking, with regard to telelearning. But with regard to telehealth, 1 in every 4 adults, based on a poll I recently saw, a survey by Morning Consult, 1 of every 4 adults, 25%, have used telehealth recently during the pandemic. It's been a lifeline for so many people. And again, particularly for some people who are fighting addiction and can't get in-person care to help their recovery, or people that have mental health challenges and are able to access telehealth to help them. So I've worked with the Trump administration to expand telehealth and delivery options, which in some instances has, for instance, allowed addiction specialists to reach new patients they hadn't been able to reach before. So again, there's been some positives here, but these reforms are only temporary. We need to make these permanent as well. We don't want to lose ground on this issue, so we've introduced legislation, Senator Whitehouse, the other side of the aisle, and myself, called the TREATS Act. And we want that to be part of the final legislation as well. We have an opportunity to help with telehealth by expanding broadband access as well, so that more Americans can access these services from home. This also relates, of course, to education. When schools are telling us they're going to go partly in-person classrooms, partly remote, or some altogether remote, if you live in a rural area of America, you may not have access to broadband, and therefore you're at a disadvantage. Also, a lot of our urban school districts, there may be the infrastructure for broadband, but it's not in the home. So we need to help more in terms of broadband. I'm the Senate sponsor of a bipartisan bicameral bill called the Rural Broadband Acceleration Act, which basically speeds up the FCC's distribution they're going to make anyway of $20 billion in rural digital funds to go toward the building of broadband networks. This will help spread high-speed internet over more than 400,000 miles of internet fiber cables, bringing about 3 million new households online immediately, if we can get this done. By the way, it employs thousands of workers as well. I think it's a great investment in infrastructure that's needed right now. So people talk about infrastructure. This is one we could do right now that helps with regard to telehealth, telemedicine, certainly telelearning, and teleworking. The nation will be looking to Congress in the coming weeks to work together to make sure that we can improve our response to the coronavirus and help get this economy through a tough time. Now more than ever, we cannot revert to the norm, which is partisanship these days. We cannot do that with regard to this issue. Using this new targeted bill as a base, the one that, again, got a majority of senators in this chamber to vote on today, and building on some of the areas of agreement I've outlined today, we need to come up with an appropriate and effective bill that responds to the challenge. I'm going to continue to work with Republicans and Democrats alike to insist we put the partisanship aside and work on behalf of our constituents to take the necessary steps to get us through this unprecedented health care crisis, to get us on the other side of the economic crisis. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to work together to do the same. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
I move to proceed to executive session to consider calendar number 589.
The question is on the motion to proceed. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The motion is agreed to. Clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, the judiciary, Mark C. Scarsi of California to be United States District Judge for the Central District of California.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
The clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Mark C. Scarsi of California to be United States District Judge for the Central District of California, signed by 17 senators as follows.
I ask consent the reading of the names be waived.
Without
I
objection,
move to proceed to legislative session.
question is on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion's agreed to.
I move to proceed to executive session to consider calendar number 590.
The question is on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. The ayes have it. Motion's agreed to. Clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, the judiciary, Stanley Bloomfeld of California to be United States District Judge for the Central District of California.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
Clerk will report the motion.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Stanley Blumenfeld of California to be United States District Judge for the Central District of California, signed by 17 senators as
I ask
follows.
consent the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
I move to proceed to legislative session.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Ayes have it. Motion's agreed to.
I move to proceed to executive session to consider calendar number 773.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Ayes have it. Motion's agreed to. Clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, the judiciary, John W. Holcomb of California to be United States District Judge for the Central District of California.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
Clerk will report.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of John W. Holcomb of California to be United States District Judge for the Central District of California, signed by 17 senators as follows.
I ask consent the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
I move to proceed to legislative session.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Ayes have it. Motion's agreed to.
I move to proceed to executive session to consider calendar number 774.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Ayes have it. Motion's agreed to. Clerk will report.
Nomination, the judiciary, Todd Wallace Robinson of California to be United States District Judge for the Southern District of California.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
Clerk will report.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Todd Wallace Robinson of California to be United States District Judge for the Southern District of California, signed by 17
I
senators
ask
as
consent the
follows.
reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
I move to proceed to legislative session.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it. Motion's agreed to.
I move to proceed to executive session to consider calendar number 812.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Ayes appears to have it. The motion's agreed to. Clerk will report.
Nomination, the judiciary, David W. Duggan of Illinois to be United States District Judge for the Southern District of Illinois.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
Clerk will report.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of David W. Duggan of Illinois to be United States District Judge for the Southern District of Illinois, signed by 17 senators as
I
follows.
ask consent the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
I move to proceed to legislative session.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Ayes have it. The motion's agreed to.
I move to proceed to executive session to consider calendar 813.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Ayes have it. Motion's agreed to. Clerk will report.
Nomination, the Judiciary, Stephen P. McGlynn of Illinois to be United States District Judge for the Southern District of Illinois.
I send the cloture motion to the desk.
Clerk will report.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Stephen P. McGlynn of Illinois to be United States District Judge for the Southern District of Illinois, signed by 17 senators as follows.
I ask consent the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
I move to proceed to legislative session.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Ayes have it. Motion's agreed to.
I move to proceed to executive session to consider calendar number 814.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Ayes have it. The motion's agreed to. Clerk will report.
Nomination, the Judiciary, Ian D. Johnston of Illinois to be United States District Judge for the Northern District of Illinois.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
Clerk will report.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Ian D. Johnston of Illinois to be United States District Judge for the Northern District of Illinois, signed by 17 senators as follows.
I ask consent the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
I move to proceed to legislative session.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it. The motion's agreed to.
I move to proceed to executive session to consider calendar 816.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Ayes appear to have it. The motion's agreed to. Clerk will report.
Nomination, the Judiciary, Franklin Ulysses Valderrama of Illinois to be United States District Judge for the Northern District of Illinois.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
Clerk will report.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Franklin Ulysses Valderrama of Illinois to be United States District Judge for the Northern District of Illinois, signed by 17 senators as follows.
I ask consent the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
I ask consent the mandatory quorum calls for the cloture motions be waived.
Without objection.
I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President,
Senator from Hawaii,
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to vitiate the quorum call.
without objection.
Mr. President, actions speak louder than words, and by their actions, it's clear that the Majority Leader and Senate Republicans have not been serious about passing another COVID relief bill that matches the urgency of this moment. First, the Majority Leader wanted to take a pause. Then he sat on the House-passed HEROES Act for months. Then in July, he introduced a series of inadequate piecemeal bills that went absolutely nowhere. And now, the Majority Leader and Senate Republicans showed their priorities yet again by rushing to confirm 5 more Trump judges and offering an anemic, weak COVID bill aimed at appeasing the most conservative members of their caucus. And we just voted on that bill. So while Senate Republicans have been waiting for Godot on the next COVID bill, Senate Democrats have been listening to our constituents and have a sense of urgency. We've had this sense of urgency for, well, the 4 months that we've been waiting for us to deal with the HEROES Act. So we've been waiting for over 4 months, as I mentioned, for the Majority Leader to stop taking a pause. American workers and families couldn't afford a pause for 4 months, and they certainly can't afford to take a pause now. In fact, things have gotten worse. While Republicans sat on their hands, our country was facing and continues to face a grim reality. In the coming days, we are certain to pass the almost unthinkable milestone of 200,000 deaths from COVID-19. On March 29th, when Dr. Fauci warned us that America could reach this milestone as an almost worst-case scenario, 2,300 Americans had died. And because Donald Trump has provided no national leadership, Dr. Fauci's warning will, more than sadly, soon come to pass. Over 6 million Americans have contracted coronavirus. Tens of millions of Americans remain out of work. Millions of Americans have lost their health care. Colleges and universities have started their fall sessions with students back on campus and are experiencing significant outbreaks. Millions of parents are facing the agonizing choice of sending their children to schools that aren't safe or dealing with the challenge of distance learning and childcare needs. And state after state, long abandoned by the Trump administration's failure to lead during the pandemic, are left on their own to deal with billions in budget deficits as a result of the pandemic and to make difficult decisions about how to confront new outbreaks. In Hawaii, new cases have been rising since July. The severity of our outbreak, particularly on Oahu, led the mayor of the city and county of Honolulu, on Oahu, to issue a 2-week stay-at-home order on August 27th. And yesterday, he extended this order for another 2 weeks. This order and the outbreak that preceded it offer a grim reminder that constant vigilance is necessary in the fight against COVID-19. And it's a reminder that even states like Hawaii, which for months was lauded as a coronavirus success story, can become home to one of the fastest growing outbreaks in the country. At the end of July, Hawaii had barely over 2,000 cases of COVID-19. Yesterday, Hawaii crossed the grim milestone of 10,000 cases. Like in many other states, our outbreak has hit certain communities and populations the hardest. Our thriving, dynamic, and vital Pacific Islander community represents a mere 4% of our population, but nearly 1/3 of our total cases. More than a dozen long-term care homes across our state are experiencing significant outbreaks that put our kupuna, our seniors, at heightened risk. The Oahu Community Correctional Center has seen 299 inmates and 76 staff members infected with COVID-19. The rising caseload on Oahu is putting pressure on Hawaii's already understaffed medical system, where existing provider shortages are straining the capacity of our hospitals. Although Hawaii's outbreak is centered on Oahu, we are seeing troubling signs on the neighbor islands as well, with serious outbreaks at the Okutsu State Veterans Home in Hilo and Maui Memorial Medical Center in Kahului. As we analyze and assess what's happening in Hawaii, the most important thing our state can do is learn from our experience and not to repeat the same mistakes. We have to explain things clearly and plainly, and we have to be accountable and transparent in our decision-making. Our state certainly should have done a better job conducting outreach to at-risk communities, expanding our testing capacity, developing an effective contact tracing system, and establishing a clearer chain of command. But we don't have the luxury of simply pointing fingers, assigning blame, and moving on. In other words, we cannot be like the president. Instead, we need to work together to get our outbreak under control and support the hundreds of thousands of Hawaii residents who have suffered from this unprecedented public health and economic crisis. The Senate must do its part by passing a real, comprehensive COVID relief bill that would help states like Hawaii confront their outbreaks and help the millions of Americans who are suffering right now. While the majority leader struggles to unite his caucus even around an emaciated, weak bill like the one we voted on today, Democrats are united behind passing the HEROES Act because that bill's scope matches the urgency and severity of this moment. I certainly understand and appreciate the need to negotiate and compromise to get something done, but we cannot lose sight of who we are fighting for. Unlike the majority leader and Senate Republicans who are fighting tooth and nail for corporate interests in the next COVID bill, I'm fighting for the workers, families, and small businesses who are getting screwed. I'm fighting for Hawaii small business owners like Laura Andersland, who runs Salty Wahine on Kauai. Laura is one of the favorites at Hawaii on the Hill, where many of my colleagues, including those on the other side of the aisle, lined up to sample Salty Wahine's Hawaiian salts. Laura's products are incredible, and her success over the years reflects the hard work she's put into building and growing her business. But Laura and Salty Wahine have been devastated by the pandemic. Although she was able to take advantage of past relief programs that we passed, Laura is struggling. She needs more help right now to pay the rent and rehire her employees. Alongside congressional Democrats, I'm fighting for hundreds of billions in new assistance for small businesses like Laura's. I'm fighting for the homeowners and renters who have lost their jobs and are terrified to think of what might happen to them if the federal protections that have prevented their foreclosures or evictions expire. I'm grateful that organizations like the Legal Aid Society of Hawaii are stepping in to help people worried that they will lose their homes. Legal Aid's Executive Director Nalani Fujimori Kaina told me that doing this work during a pandemic is like playing 3D chess on a tilt-a-whirl. In other words, it's mighty hard. The Senate needs to step up and provide the $100 billion plus in housing and rental assistance needed to make a dent in this crisis. I'm fighting for parents, teachers, and students who are struggling to adapt to the new normal of hybrid and distance learning. Grandmothers, like a retired educator I spoke with last week, she's concerned about learning loss and her 5-year-old grandson struggling to sit and learn, sitting behind a computer screen for hours a day. Women like the restaurant owner in Kauai I spoke with, she's worried about how to balance running her struggling business with tutoring her high school-aged children. And the many students I've spoken with over the past few months, they are struggling with learning loss, finding a quiet place to study from home, hunting down reliable internet at Starbucks, or having trouble concentrating, all because Republican senators can't get their acts together. We need to increase our support for public schools so they can create safer environments for students once they are back in school. And we can do this by investing billions of dollars to help states get their outbreaks under control through testing and contact tracing so we can get our kids back to school safely. That's the operative word, safely. We all want our kids to go back to school. They need to go back in a safe environment. So, Mr. President, the bill our Republican colleagues offered today was anemic and weak at best. It does more to help their corporate benefactors than to address the pain so many Americans are feeling right now. And after today's vote, I'm left wondering, how much more pain do the American people have to endure before Senate Republicans get serious and act? How many more Americans have to die? How many more Americans have to lose their jobs? How many more businesses have to close? How many more children have to go hungry during this pandemic? How many more people have to lose their health insurance? The list goes on. I say to the majority leader, what's it going to take for you to finally do your job? Mr. President, I yield the floor.
The senator from Hawaii.
I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President,
Senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, are we in a quorum call?
Yes.
Mr. President, I ask that the proceedings of the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today to express my support for my colleague Senator Duckworth's resolution honoring the service and sacrifices of members of the United States Armed Forces and our veterans. The resolution rightly criticizes President Trump for a series of statements and actions which have denigrated our men and women in uniform, our veterans, and our institutions. Service and sacrifice run deep among my constituents in the Commonwealth of Virginia. With 130,000 active duty members living in Virginia, the Commonwealth has one of the highest populations of military personnel in the nation. And Virginia is home to more than 700,000 veterans, men and women who've displayed the highest level of selfless service while defending this country, who've endured hardship and have put country above self. I'm proud to call these American heroes my constituents as well as my neighbors, and I'm humbled to represent and serve them in Congress. I'm thankful to them for protecting this great country. President Trump, though, again and again, has made disrespectful remarks about service members, veterans, and military leaders, despite being commander-in-chief. His name-calling and disdain for the value of service is divisive and dangerous. Remember how President Trump ridiculed the Gold Star parents of Army Captain Humayun Khan, who died in June 2004 from an IED in Iraq. Mr. and Mrs. Khan, Kazir Khan, are residents of Virginia. Or remember his comments questioning whether Senator John McCain should be called a hero. And his recent comments, even after the reports of his comments in the Atlantic article came out, his recent comments that our top officials at DOD want to continue fighting wars to make defense contractors happy. Whether it's pardoning and excusing those in uniform who commit crimes, or not standing up to President Putin in defense of our troops when reports emerge that bounties have been offered for killing members of our armed forces, whether it's deploying our military in response to peaceful protests, threatening to politicize and divide our military from civilian society, the president, on each of these occasions, is on the wrong side of honoring our service members. These actions and statements are an affront to everyone who serves or has served. They are unacceptable and unpresidential. Instead, let's stay focused on what matters in this country. Let's stay united. We need to ensure that we're expressing each and every day how thankful we are to those who serve for protecting the freedoms we hold dear. Mr. President, I want to thank Senator Duckworth for the introduction of this resolution, and more so, I thank her for a dedicated and exemplary military service to our country. It's my hope that all my colleagues in the Senate will recognize the mistakes made by our Commander-in-Chief when addressing the heroes of our military and our nation's veterans. Thank you, Mr. President. With that, I notice the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. Hopkins, I'll take you in about 5 minutes. I know, you're supposed to hit the top, but obviously with this, could be.